Hello there, this is your director Dhiraj Singh, and this is the first of our series of chats which I've called DM from Director. I'm sorry I was supposed to take this earlier this week, but because of my COVID positive status and the following quarantine requirement, I could not take this live with you. So which is why I'm recording it today, even though I'm still under quarantine and not completely okay. I decided not to delay my message to you any further. So what I'm going to talk about is the 360-degree story. Now you may be wondering, what exactly is a 360-degree story? A 360-degree story is a story which answers or gives you the picture in such an absolute totality that you have absolutely no questions left after it's over. When I say story, I talk in a very general, loose sense of the word. Story is something of a communication block for all of us who are in the field of communications, in media and journalism. Some of you may wonder that story is only something which people in the news write or people in magazines write. That is one of your fundamental mistakes. A story is a basic building block of communication that people across the board in any kind of communication are using all the time, 24/7. So even if you're in advertising, you are selling a story. If you're in public relations, you're also telling the story of a particular organization or an individual. A story is the most important thing, which is why I have developed this term called 360-degree story. So in this lecture, I'm going to be talking about 5 key aspects of the 360-degree story. The first is emotions. Like everything that we humans do, and especially so about stories, emotional investment, our emotional investment becomes the most important part of the story. Why should I be interested? How is it going to affect my life? What am I going to do with all this information coming my way? That is why it becomes very important for you as a communications professional to find out how much are you willing to invest in this story? How much is your emotional investment going to be towards the telling of the story? Because remember, if you yourself as the storyteller or as the creator of the storyboard are not invested in the story, you will not be able to bring about any impact on your audience. Remember, the more you are emotionally invested in the story, the better is the outcome of the story going to be. Some of the best editors that I've worked with had this remarkable sense of which story is going to have that emotional connect with the audiences. Now, it doesn't take a genius or a magician to know how much a story is going to touch you emotionally. It comes with practice, it comes with research, it comes with study and observing the human animal from very, very close quarters, from very, very different perspectives and points of view. Today, the kind of stories that come our way is determined to a large extent by our algorithms, but there was a time when there was just plain gut feeling and sense of the editor or the man in charge or the woman in charge that determined what kind of story was printed in the next day's newspaper. The second important part of the 360-degree story is that it should be counterintuitive. Counterintuitiveness means that there is a certain narrative, there is a certain perception of something or someone, and everyone sort of accepts it hands down without questioning it, without even thinking why this thing is perceived to be this way. So what a counterintuitive story does is that it changes the intuitive understanding of people about a certain place, a certain person, a certain thing or phenomenon or event, and so on and so forth. Now, counterintuitiveness about a story is very, very important because that is what makes your story a headline story, or it gives your story a great opening line. Remember that often heard phrase in classrooms is that dog bites man is not a story, but man bites dog is a story. That man bites dog is the counterintuitive part of the story, which says that this is a given fact that a dog will often go and bite a running man at the heels, or thinking that he's a robber and taking something from his master's house. But if the story is reversed, or a counter-intuitive proposition enters the picture, that is when people's ears get perked up and their eyes light up. They want to listen to the story. So how do you get that counter-intuitive edge to your story? That also comes with experience. When you're able to recognize patterns, when you become an ace at pattern recognition, only then are you able to break those patterns and create new patterns of understanding, new patterns of empathy, new patterns of ways of looking at a same event, a same person from a different perspective. A great example of this would be how the LGBT group began to slowly normalize the behavior in people's eyes and minds. It didn't happen overnight, because the perception of human sexuality remained for a very, very long time, thousands of years, singly focused on what we call the heteronormative acceptance. It was only very recently, in the last few decades, that this kind of understanding has seeped into our common discourse. As a phenomenon, it is hugely counterintuitive. It does require a lot of rigor on the part of the storyteller to be able to convince his audiences to realize that there are a variety of normals and there is just not one normal. The third part of the 360-degree story is progression. A story should be able to progress the existing views and notions and ideas about a particular thing, because when you write about something, you're writing by the time it's coming out, especially with the speed of information and the information sort of overload that we have today, the speed of information, the way things can go viral overnight in seconds, that has increased so much that by the time you set out to say something, there's so much that's already being said about that particular thing or event. And what is important for you to remember at that point is that you're saying or adding to what is already being said about the story should, in a way, progress the story further. Progression isn't always about going further, but it is also about branching out in different aspects. For example, there is a running story on, and there is a murder, and everyone's curious about who the murderer may be. They are suspects, but no one's sure. And this happened with the Sushant Singh suicide. A lot of questions are there on people's minds, and they want answers for that. And every time some new report comes or new addition to that phenomenon happens, people find their pool of ideas and suppositions increases with time. And in the Sushant case, this happened a lot because we were seeing how progression or negative progression was impacting people. There were YouTubers who just came up overnight, and they were going on and on with conspiracy theories. Now, there is a very clear distinction that I'd like to make here, that progression does not mean that you lapse into conspiracy theories. Your original idea of being a storyteller has to be grounded in the facts of the case, in the merit of the case, in the realities of the case. The fourth most important point about the 360-degree story is that how you approach telling that story. Every story, a lot of stories have different ways and methods that suit them in their progression. And what method or approach you use for your story is determined by what kind of story it is that you are trying to portray. So who you use as the narrator, if you want to have that, or whose point of view you're telling the story is, that becomes an important part of your approach. And all these aspects determine how impactful or how deeply connecting your story is going to be with your audience. The fifth and the last point, which is most important for the 360-degree story, is the detailing. Remember, there's an often repeated proverb that says the devil lies in the details, and that is absolutely true. You build up a structure, you build up a skeleton, and you have to fill in the skeleton with a lot of details. There is at the same time a flip side to adding too many details. Sometimes an over explanation of things takes the interest out. So the key is to explain just enough, not too much, not too less. The details are important in progression of the plot. They tell you not just the 5 W's in H, but also gives a sort of flavor and feeling and atmospherics that are very important in the storytelling. The details are what hold the plot together. Always be mindful of the things that have stayed with you, things that you remember most from the story that has come out from all your research or your perhaps being witness to something. The details are very important. You remember the sound, a particular grating sound that someone was making while you were observing something, or how the car sped past, what color the car was. There came a lady into the picture who was asking for a cheap cologne. Why was she asking for a cheap cologne? Why couldn't she buy an expensive one? These are the aspects that stay on in your mind, and they push you to find out more and more and more, and that is how the story progresses, and that becomes a very, very key aspect of the 360-degree story.